describe entirely the phenomena because the constituent bits will never be the whole, right? I mean, it's like saying
Right.
a triangle is three lines positioned in a certain way in a given context. That's fine, but then if the person said, for example, reality is just lines, well, they're wrong because they're positing a unity between the lines. Also, they're positing things like an internal and an external area, right? So if you draw three lines or four lines or whatever, however many lines you want to use to make a shape, once we do that, we recognize an internal area that's, enclosed by the lines. And then we have an external area that's beyond the lines. And nothing about a line or just like an accumulation of lines defines the difference or constitutes a difference between an enclosed and a non-enclosed area
Yeah, but in
or
that
a
case, aren't
shape.
you just incorporating more information about context?
Yeah, well,
Like what you're
that is
pointing to
something,
isn't a
right?
paradigm case where strong emergence would be warranted.
Well, I don't. So I'm not sure what these strong and weak or any sort of emergent people say, but the concern is just we can't we can't pretend that the world would be defined by a line or lines because clearly it wouldn't be, right? Because a bunch of lines is never going to explain what an enclosed or unenclosed space is. That needs a context or a grid, for example, where the lines can be arrayed, and that is now meaningful. So I don't think anyone can ever. No one's going to be able to explain the world with anything less than the world. It just doesn't make sense. They're just going to get trapped in this situation where they'll say, like, oh, I can explain everything with lines. And then it's like, well, or everything is lines. Maybe they can explain a lot with lines, but they can't say that everything is lines because clearly there's more to the picture than lines.
Yeah, I
And
mean,
and they're
this
just
is. Have you explored like sort of the parallel between Parmenidean thinking and sort of Buddhist traditions and whatnot? Because this seems to me to be just like a relational ontology.
yeah, I don't read any Buddhist stuff. Not that I am saying that they're all wrong or anything. I just don't know what they say. I don't read
Mm.
Buddhism.
I've always said that the basic ingredients for Buddhism are present in the Western tradition in the form of like Parmenides and Hume. You can get a significant amount of like the central Buddhist claims off the ground if you take Parmenides seriously and also Hume.
Yeah, well, I don't even know what Hume says.
Yeah, you're like I'd say that you're like an anti-modernist in a good way. You have your interest and that's that.
Yeah, I just have the people that I think said the right thing, and then I just stick with them. I mean, maybe someday I'll read some Buddhist work and I'll think it's great. Maybe one day.
I think
The
yeah. Like or Hindu schools too. Advaita Vedanta and so on is in the non-duality that is associated with that is it's hard to under that framework it's hard not to see how certain Parmenidean conclusions like the identity of being aren't sort of necessitated or entailed by those frameworks. So there is definitely
yeah
parallel and vice versa. Like the identity of being principle in Parmenides kind of entails non-duality.
the I keep getting told about Advaita Vedanta and Hindus and stuff. Which is fine, but one of the concerns is they they want to so they have certain religious commitments or ideas, and they will want to associate being or what is with God. And I think it leads them into certain mistakes because, and again, I'm not read in their material, I just interact with them sometimes. And what I find is that they won't want to acknowledge that everything would be 100% divine. Because if you so Parmenides, Melissus, these other Eleatics, they don't associate, they don't term what is or being God. So it's just being or what is not a divinity or something. So the fear is that if you do that, what's the point? Because the term God, when these people say it, is supposed to have some sort of significance. But but they'll eliminate that significance as soon as they apply the label God to what is or being, because then just everything is divine, 100%. And so
Right.
it's usually where the discussions with them go. They'll be like, okay, so what is, or the whatever they term the overall catch-all phrase for being, that's God. And it's like, okay, well then I'm 100% divine. And they'll say, no, no, no. And it's like, well, what else could I be other than what is? So
Yeah,
if
yeah,
what
yeah. It's there's going to
is
be
God, then
there's
everything
going to
about
be
what
a
is God.
shared nature, right? There's going to be a shared nature. Like whatever is true fundamentally is going to be true for all things that are connected
Exactly.
to that fundamentality. But what I would say is that at least the objection would be that when interpreting any religious text, right? There's a whole tradition of hermeneutics of how the sort of etymology of terms relates to our kind of modernist conception of God, which largely is a westernized, sort of Western-centric concept of God. And it seems reading of the Hindu tradition and so on, in texts like the Rig Vedas, and is that it's a much more subtle concept of God that really does it's just simply defining God as the totality of being, and typically having some sort of conscious properties.
Well, that's
Uh,
but having conscious properties is a problem, right? Because then it's like, how would it have conscious properties? Because then you'd have like a mind, and you'd have me in my mind, and then you have two minds. So the whole would subsume both my mind and the God mind. So you'd have like a
but
bigger
that's
being
precisely
over the
but
mind and my
Pridafan,
mind.
that's precisely the point of Advaita Vedanta non-dual, is that distinction is only apparent. That conceptually or ontologically, um, there is just this one sort of whole, that at least the claim is that from a first person perspective you can get in contact with this perception that there is just that whole, and there's only an apparent distinction. Like the distinction is just conceptual.
But well, I guess then it gets in a discussion of, I don't mean to hold you as the person who's now going to have to explain to me Advaita Vedanta, but my concern is just immediately, it's like, well, what do you mean it's a conceptual distinction? I mean, a distinction is a distinction. It's like people who say like, oh, that's just an illusion. And it's like, well, in what sense is it an illusion? Because if everything is what it is, then illusion still absolutely is something, just like everything else
Well, an
absolutely is
illusion,
something.
but an illusion, again, an illusion exists. I get what you mean. Like there's no sense in which an illusion can't exist because it exists as what it is, namely an illusion, right? But it's more of the epistemic content of that illusion, right? It entails that typically an illusion is something that's representing it. Like if you were to take its content seriously, it would misguide you. That is to say, it's representing something that's not really there, right? So the the illusion exists in and of itself as an illusion, but it's sort of defined by the fact that it's misleading. And so in this sense, I could say that it's trivially true to say that certain perceptions, like whatever theory of truth, coherence theory, correspondence theory, I'll just use correspondence for the moment, don't correspond to reality. However, they exist as perceptions. They're just as real as everything else, but their content isn't misleading. It doesn't represent what's fundamental. And there are various perceptions that, like, in the important thing to understand about Advaita Vedanta, and I'm just playing devil's advocate for it. I'm not a Hindu, but to understand the tradition, it's Advaita Vedanta is fundamentally a first person practice. So it's trying to arrive at the insights of a broader Hindu tradition by direct experience. It's typically called, in Western language, the direct path, where you have some immediate experience of the totality of being, where it's largely thought of as a pre-conceptual, non-conceptual space, a pre-linguistic sort of mode of cognition that you go into to experience the whole of everything. And that's the sense in which we say, when you return to conventional reality from that experience, that the distinction between you and the rest of everything is just conceptual. I'm not sure if I'd call it illusory, but that's what's kind of meant by that.
Yeah, I mean, in a sense, I reject it in the sense of I don't think it's just conceptual or just illusory or just misleading or something. I think everything is what it is, and so it is. I am me and you are you, and that's absolute and undeniable. And whatever account of reality we give, it has to accommodate that. Really, what I can appreciate though is the attempt at a bigger picture to say there's a whole that subsumes both of us. And so if we gave an account where we just said there's Tweetathon and there's John, and that, and then we ended our sentence there and called it a day, then I'd be like, okay, well, the Advaita Vedanta guys have something to add there because they're saying there's this greater whole that subsumes both of us. And so really we should be saying that reality is one big thing and these are just details of it.
It's more important than that, though. It's more important than that. It would be that the whole, yes, there is this whole, and additionally, the whole is such that it dissolves the distinction between you and me. That's sort of the additional claim that it dissolves.
I don't see what they mean by dissolve then. Like, what is the dissolve? I mean, this is actually Tao. I mean, you can find this in Zhuangzi. This is Taoism for me. And I like it. I agree with it. But when the person then says dissolve, then I'm like, what are you doing?
It shouldn't be. The point is just, Tweetathon, we reference metaphors and language all the time to refer to. So obviously, when I use dissolve as a descriptive term, it's metaphorical. It's a term that is using a metaphor to visually represent a process that is obviously, when ontologically instantiated, not a literal dissolving or dissolution of something with physical properties. It's not like a boundary was there to be dissolved. It's to say that the concept, the human concept, is dissolved. But again, a metaphor to represent a process of a belief being suspended when encountering something that entails its negation.
Well, if we are just right, let's put the word dissolve away. Let's go back to what you said, where you said that Advaita Vedanta is this attempt to, it's an experiential philosophy. We're attempting to experience the whole, I guess, and not be focused on your own perspective. Those weren't your exact words, but you said something about how it's aimed at an experience. And to that extent, great, I can appreciate it. If we're going to define dissolve in a way that instead means something like not focus on your own perspective to the exclusion of other things and how other things relate to you, but try to focus on everything as a whole and not associate with yourself, then okay. Then if that's what the dissolving was, if it was the attempt at that experience of the whole, then yeah, I can appreciate that. And I think that's just, I don't read any Advaita Vedanta at all, but that's present in Taoism. I mean, you can open your copy of Zhuangzi, just go to the second chapter. It should be there as your second chapter in the inner chapters. And the first section is going to be exactly that. It's going to be two disciples who are sitting around chatting, and one of them, he kind of he's not passed out, but he's motionless, and he's not saying anything. And the other guy says, "Hey, what's up?" And then he says, "Oh, just now I disassociated from myself. I was like a dead tree, or like a gnarled dead wood, or like ashes in a fireplace. I just saw that there was you and there was me and there was everything, and it was all just part of this one." Again, I'm just not directly quoting the text. I don't have it in front of me, but but essentially he disassociates from himself and appreciates that the whole or the Tao or all that is. And so if that's the experience that they're aiming for in Advaita Vedanta, then yeah, I can appreciate that. I mean, I read that in other texts that aren't from that tradition, but I can appreciate it. I just don't think there's any dissolving. I think that guy, what's his name? It's like Nanza Guoqi or something. I forget what his name is. Anyway, he's just disassociating from himself. And it's almost like Socrates says philosophy is the art of dying, in a sense. He had his own reasons for saying that, and I don't really necessarily agree with Socrates, but it's almost like the disciple in that story I'm relating from the Zhuangzi in the Qi Wu Luan chapter is also indicating that philosophy is a sort of act of dying, because he's disassociating that experience where you're no longer you, but rather a sort of no particular thing or no particular vantage point, then yeah, I appreciate that. I've seen that in other texts, although I never read Advaita Vedanta.
Yeah. So I find that many traditions who that sort of contemplate, uh, well, many traditions in general who have mystical practices sort of arrive at this perception. I call it the Gestalt perception, when sort of distinction breaks down and there's like a kind of one. Neoplatonism describes it as the sort of Neoplatonic one. Arguably, there's a kind of one, a whole being in Parmenides, who you're familiar with.
Well, I
So
don't. So I think the Neoplatonists are incapable of this. I think they may or may not appreciate their failure, but I don't think that they are capable of this point. So Taoists are, Eleatics are, maybe the Advaita Vedanta people are. I don't personally know, but it sounds like they are. But Neoplatonists are not capable of this because they don't have a term. They don't have an appreciation for the whole. Like the one is not the whole. It's not like an all subsuming one. It's rather like some sort of absolute that's separate from us, and we get emanated or whatever. So I think that Neoplatonists, all the Abrahamic religions, this is my opinion, but I think they're cut off from this. I think they're incapable of appreciating the truth.
yeah, I don't know enough about Neoplatonic models. I'd say my intuition would be that, by the one, they do mean something similar to what you're describing as the whole. That'd be my baseline
Well,
intuition. And I think of
here's my
emanation.
concern. Maybe now I'm also trying to force you to be the Neoplatonist. Maybe because I can't do it. I don't know Neoplatonism that well, but the my understanding is they essentially think that there's the one, which is this ineffable one that we can't say much about, although they seem happy to say a lot about it anyway, and it emanates out other things, and so the stuff that's emanated out is not the one, or is not wholly subsumed by the one. Because Platonists have to maintain that there's a hierarchy of being, right? Like some things are more real and some things less real.
Yeah, it's been a long
And
time since I think it was in philosophy, sort of. I don't know what, some sort of very rudimentary class where we went over, Plotinus, and then we went over Occam's response with the, what does he call it, univocity of being or whatever. Uh, that being is univocal or univocal, and that's kind
yeah,
of
well,
like,
I think the
you'd be
Christians
endorsing
are
that
stuck as
position.
well. Well, I think the Christians are stuck as well because the Christians also want a hierarchy of being because they, again, I'm not a Christian either, but they seem to want to have a God in creation, right? And creation is less real than God.
In defense, I'm going to defend all the people, all the camps to which I don't subscribe here. But in defense of the Christians, I even think that there are some Trinitarians where the differentiation, it shouldn't be reified. It's just apparent. I mean, personally, I can't make sense of those models, but I do think that they exist.
Well, the
Where
Christian would never want to say that I'm 100% divine, right?
Christians wouldn't, and I understand what you mean. If any property is going to be fundamental, then it's going to be true of all things that are in the same sort of context, of being. So, yeah, you can't. I'm not
Yeah,
sure.
so
There's
that,
probably some objection to that argument, though. I
yeah,
have
but
to
that's
think
but
for a
that's why I
second.
think they're forbidden or like barred from the truth because unlike the Taoist or the Advaita Vedanta guy or the Eleatic, they're never going to be able to identify the whole because they're never going to be able to reduce like God. Because essentially, if they're going to say there's God and then there's creation, I'm going to say, okay, well, what is it that swallows both of those up? Like, what holds them in common? What is the whole? They're not going to have a term for that. And then if you
I'd say it
say,
would be. I would say
yeah,
like maybe something like the fact of somethingness itself, though, because the prior condition for both God and creation is something. Like God is the direct negation of nothingness. Like there is no. I understand that there are traditions where there's genuine creation ex nihilo, but barring that, God is the sort of negation of nothingness. He is the eternal somethingness that has always been. He's the foundation of being, and his creation is sort of causally related to him and his nature. And in some sense, that's just a process following from the nature of another process. Namely, that's like being like a different configuration of being that relies on the existence of God. So there's a causal relation there, and presumably anywhere where there's a causal relation, the two bits involved in that causal relation can be collapsed into a whole, like the context that facilitates their ability to be related. Does that sort of register? I understand there are models where that's kind of how they represent it.
I mean, it's difficult to appreciate it because I think much of what was said is not because you did something wrong, but just because I just don't think it makes much sense. But but yeah, it's like you said that he's like the opposite of nothing. It's like, well, you're going to posit a nothing then for him to be an opposite of it's just not going to work out. But
No. You
but
don't
also
have to wait. Importantly, you don't have to, because again, here nothingness is just serving as a kind of
it can't serve as anything.
Well, exactly.
It's not there to serve.
It's the conceptual inverse of the fact that there is something. So like it's not.
No, but there's
Wait, Tweetathon. That's a fundamental mistake. You're not positing nothingness to say that God is like the eternal somethingness. He just is. For something to be the negation of something doesn't mean that you have to posit the negation. The negation.
Yes, you do.
No.
But how could it be there to be the negation of it? Like you said, like this thing will be the negation of what is, and it's like, wait, what?
No.
Because it's not there to be the negation.
No. Okay, what? I'm so puzzled by what you're saying. You think that anytime something is there has to be something to be negated, but like a false a false
I think the use of negation is a mistake.
Sorry, what?
I think this whole line of thinking where everything is in a dichotomy, like what is in a dichotomy with what is not, or with negation. I think that whole line of thinking is a mistake. It's not going to work. It's just fundamentally
well how do you get
can't be done.
But that's what your metaphysics is contingent on. It's contingent on
the
distinction between being and non-being. And
no, it's not. No. There's no non-being. There's only being. The point is there's only being.
Yeah, but okay, but still conceptually, there is either being or non-being. What's those two cannot like it's just a listen. It's just a logical sort of construct that's necessarily true. That if you like, I don't understand how this isn't registering.
Well, then I think that's just gibberish.
Wait. To say that there
said anything.
To say that there is being means necessarily like that entails that there is not non-being, but that doesn't mean that you have to posit non-being for being to negate non-being. That's where it gets incoherent. I think it's your insistence that you have to posit non-being for being to negate non-being, and it's just it's just the basic law of excluded middle, or law of non-identity.
I just disagree. I just disagree. I think this is a fundamental error that has destroyed all metaphysics from various schools I disagree with. I think when you say that is actually solitary, alone. It's not opposed to anything else. But so when we say that...
Wait, hold up. It isn't. But logically, though, necessarily, there's an immediate sort of entailment that, therefore, like there is entails that...
Well, I'm just denying that. I'm saying you're wrong.
Not what is.
No, I'm saying that's
an immediately
wrong.
Entailment. But how? You demonstrate that in a way because...
There's nothing else... There's nothing for me to demonstrate because there's nothing for me to respond to.
For me, it seems logically impossible for that to be wrong. That the fact that there's something negates the fact that there's nothing, or that there's a fundamental dichotomy. In other words,
there's no dichotomy. Yeah, that's the big realization. That's the big realization.
But no, it just but conceptually though, it just entails like
no, it doesn't.
Okay, unless dialetheism is true and there are true contradictions, if that's what you're
No,
arguing for,
no,
presumably
no,
you're not
no.
arguing. Wait,
Here's
Tweetupon,
the
just let me
issue.
finish. Just let me finish. Presumably you're not arguing that there are true contradictions. If there aren't true contradictions, the co-occurrence of somethingness and nothingness is a true contradiction that can obtain. That violates the law of excluded middle. That violates the law of identity, right? P is not negative P at the same time. Would you agree with that? P cannot equal negative P. Do you agree with that?
But P cannot equal negative P. I mean,
Yes,
P is
something
P.
cannot
P is what it
equal
is.
the
Each thing
negation of
is what it
itself.
is. No,
But
because
they can't.
you're just asking me to engage in thinking that I think is based on gibberish.
It's
I
not
think that
gibberish
everything
though.
is what it is. No, it is actually.
It's based on
So let's
rational
go back to the
intuition.
main point, because we have to go to that original point, which was, is what is opposed to some other thing? And the answer
No,
is, that's incoherent.
but
It just is what there is, and that's the end of the sentence. And those who go beyond and name two when they should have named one,
no. But
they are forbidden from the
Tweetupon.
truth. They're cut off.
But
They can't ever have the truth.
But Tweetupon, positions have entailments, right? So each position, like if you're going
Where
to
is this divine rule of like there is and is
you gotta
not
let me
that is
finish.
opposed to what is?
You gotta let me finish. It's just a like by rational intuition. I mean, you can reject logic, you can reject the laws of logic, we can argue about the grounding of logic, but just by rational intuition, there are certain positions whose properties, whose claims are such that other things are going to be true if said position is true. There are certain propositions that, in other words, have entailments. And a direct entailment of any ontology under which there is something, just logically, conceptually, is the fact that there is also not nothing. Because one is conceptually the negation of the other. It just follows. There's no additional step. You don't need to posit nothingness. It's a simple entailment relationship. If there is something, then there is something. That's basically the same as saying if there's something, there's not nothing, right? They're just identical. And if there's nothing, there's not something. There's just it's simply a relationship of being mutually exclusive. P cannot be negative P at the same time. They're absolutely something can only be itself if it's identical, right? That's just logically sort of necessary.
I just use it.
Yeah, no, I just
heard your kid.
you're just asserting that this is like logically required by the laws of blah blah blah, and it's like no,
I'm not asserting.
I think you're
it's
actually
just
speaking gibberish. No,
well,
you are.
Can't...
You're just asserting it.
No,
I think you're speaking gibberish.
No, but listen, Tweetupon.
Well, let me
because wait. Just let me say this one thing. Everything that there are certain things that to make intellectual progress or that are just foundational, right? In some sense, their nature is to be stipulative. But wait. No, wait.
You have to do this to play ball. It's like
no.
But
this is true.
You're completely confused.
No. This is not confused at all.
You got to do this, or you can't have meaning. You can't play the game.
No, yes, this is absolutely true. You can't use reason unless you have certain postulates. You can't.
All right, man.
You can't use reason without this. This is true. But you've rejected German philosophy.
You got to be on my side to have reason. You can't do philosophy without me.
This is the whole tradition of German philosophy, right? It's trying to account for the possibility and conditions of reason. Because
Hegel said,
no, that's not what I'm invoking at all. This is just fundamental to rational intuition. There are certain how do you do mathematics?
I'm just saying no.
Can you do?
Get why
you're
still speaking. I just said no. I just deny it.
Okay, but then,
I say you're wrong.
But I can't logic you if you don't accept logic.
I do accept logic. I'm just not accepting what you're saying. I just don't accept what you're saying.
That entails stipulations. You can't
accept
logic and think that P it can equal negative P. Something cannot equal the negation of itself if you accept logic.
I'm denying negation. I'm denying negation here. I'm saying that your mistake was when you named two instead of one. If saying that,
but it's just entailment. It's just a conceptual entailment. If there's one, then there's not the negation of that one. It's just a conceptual entailment.
You don't get it. No, you don't get it. When you said there is, okay, you just say is. That's all you say is. And if you're satisfied that that's meaningful, then great. You've got the one without anything opposed to it. That's complete.
What is meaning? What is meaning? How is there
Whatever it
semantic
is.
structure?
Any sort of significance. But wait, I'm not even finishing my point yet. I'm saying, like,
how
if
is
you
there
were satisfied,
significance without any postulates? How is there significance without intelligibility? I mean, all of these things
what are
still
you talking
require.
about?
All of
No,
these things
this is
require
you
axioms
saying
of
that.
thought that require, at some level, appealing to something that is a seeming based in rational intuition. If you
Can I speak? Can I appeal to anything? I mean, all I'm getting told is basically I have to accept your priors and models and assumptions, or else I can't play
No.
ball and can't say anything. And I'm saying, no, I think you're completely confused, and
No,
everything
but
you have to say is
it's
gibberish.
it's so rudimentary though. It's just basic.
It's a rudimentary because you call it rudimentary. Yeah, your error is
No, this
rudimentary.
is a
Your
whole.
mistake is rudimentary. You have actually made a very crucial mistake, and you're incapable of philosophy. That's my position. My position is you made a very fundamental error, and you are incapable of philosophy until you correct it. And you will always be wandering in confusion until you do so. And here is the error. If you'll let me finish, the error is that you named two when you should have named one. Because the first part of the philosophical process that you should have started with is, what are we talking about? And we talk about what is. We're talking about is. What's there? Any sort of presence or significance at all, any sort of meaning.
And if you
And then
follow
you
that
said, well,
inference,
that's opposed to a nothing. That's opposed to a
no, it's
non-being.
not. It's not opposed. It's just an entailment. It's not like there's this. I think you're
It doesn't
imagining
matter
that.
if it's an entailment or it's
No.
opposed or
I'm
it's
talking
a
about a logical
magical
relationship.
dolphin under the ocean.
No, there's a difference. There's a difference between.
there.
There's a difference between an epistemic relationship and an ontological relationship. I'm saying that epistemologically, if there is something, then by definition, just by entailment, an inference from that is that there's not nothing. It's not like then we
But that's a
posit.
mistake to make. Why would you say that? Why would you say there's not nothing? Or why would you say that you can't?
I'm
How would
just
you say
saying
there's
that it's
not
an
nothing?
entailment. The only thing that I'm getting you to
What does the
trying
word
to get you
nothing mean?
to
What does the word
grant
nothing mean?
is that
No.
there is
What does
such
the word
thing as
nothing mean?
negation. Like
You
these are
can't say
basic
it.
logical concepts that you have to posit to get logic itself
No.
off the ground.
No.
I implore you to genuinely study
What is.
the foundations of logic and see how you could get logic or even semantics, even the ability to articulate things off the ground without basic concepts like negation and the law of non-contradiction and the law of exclusion and the
feel
law
like
of
I'm blowing
identity.
your mind here. Like you haven't realized how completely wrong you've been all these years. Because when you say there's not nothing, the word you're saying is supposed to have meaning. And what is the meaning of nothing there? And you're saying, oh, it's the opposite or the negation of what is. And it's like, well, if there only is what
That's
is,
true.
how
It's
are you positing
tautological.
something other than what is?
It's not
How are you positing
positing.
something
You
other
see,
than what it is? Of course it is. You're pointing at
Tweetathon.
something. You're using the word to have that meaning.
I
You're
think that
affirming
you're
a non-affirming. It's a direct contradiction. So your words fall apart.
no, but you think that every concept has ontological realness? Like you're conflating
Yeah, I think
an epistemic notion
everything
with
is what it is. Absolutely everything exists.
that's exactly what that's precisely the opposite of what I'm claiming. I'm saying that somethingness renders nothingness an ontological possibility. I'm not saying that you have to posit nothingness in addition to somethingness such that somethingness is opposed to it. I'm just saying that logically, conceptually, somethingness is opposed to nothingness.
How about this? How about we try this? How about I ask you a quick question? Do you think there's anything other than what is? Can we talk about anything other than what is?
I think that we can talk about things that are other than what is. Ontologically,
so how about we
though,
define what is as whatever we can
that's
talk
just
about?
tautology.
How about we define what is as whatever we can just talk about?
I think that's absolutely incoherent. No.
So you don't think that we can posit a category that's just whatever we can talk about?
We can posit a category of whatever we can talk about, but that
there we go.
That's just
and so then when you say there's nothing opposing that, right? Because if you were to say there was something opposing that, you would be contradicting yourself because that category was supposed to be everything you could talk about, right?
No, because everything that is not exhausted by everything that I can represent conceptually, and by extension, everything that I can talk about.
But does a category of everything you can talk about exhaust everything you can talk about?
That's a tautology, yes, but that still doesn't.
Okay, there we go.
So
stop there. So now, that category of everything you can talk about, are you going to say there's something opposing that? Or conceptually or otherwise?
Sorry, ask the question again. I'm going to genuinely take seriously.
So you agree that we can make this category where we say whatever you can talk about. And then I'm saying that by your rules, is there now this other thing you can talk about that's beyond that, opposing it in some way? Or referenceable that opposes it?
Conceptually, yes. Yes.
Well, then how is it the category of everything you can talk about if you can then go and talk about something that's not in that category? You're just contradicting yourself.
You just rejected contradiction itself, though. Contradiction
wait,
depends
just
on
answer my
something
question.
negating itself. That's what a
You
contradiction
just said
is.
there's a
That's,
category.
wait,
There's a category of everything you can talk
no,
about.
that's
So
what
now, what are you
contradiction
talking about?
is, though. This is the direct contradiction because you're
But you can't
referencing.
contradict being.
You're
You can't
referencing.
contradict
Wait,
being.
hold up. You're referencing contradiction to contradict my epistemology when the only epistemology that I'm proposing to you is that there are certain logical axioms necessary to accept if contradiction is even a concept. Contradiction relies on things like the law of identity and excluded middle and negation. Contradiction
You're
is
dodging the
when
question,
something.
though. Let's just go back to the question.
No,
You agreed
wait.
there was a
No,
category of everything you can talk about. Now, what are you
Contradiction.
opposing it to?
No. Contradiction is when something entails its own negation. That's what contradiction is. You can't reference something that relies on negation to reject negation and then appeal to
I'm asking
contradiction.
you. You just said there's a category of everything you can talk about. So what are you talking about that's beyond that to oppose against it?
Sorry. Say that again.
You said we can have this category of everything you can talk about. And I'm saying, okay, and so what would oppose
hold up,
that?
Tweetathon. Let me specify what exactly it is that I'm granting. I'm granting that, yes, conceptually you can say there is a class of those things that you can talk about. That doesn't really.
Okay, and what are you opposing it with? What's opposed to it?
I mean, I'm not even sure what exactly this means. What's opposed to the category? I mean, those things that you can't talk about.
But how are you talking about them if they're not inside the category of things you can talk about?
I would just
You're
say
referencing
that
them
the negation
outside
of
the
somethingness
category of the
is
stuff
just.
that you can
But
reference.
in this though, it's just additionally circular because the negation of somethingness
exactly.
is. Wait, hold up. The negation of somethingness is something that I can talk about. Look, I'm referencing him in my language at the moment. It's subsumed
So it's
by
in the category of stuff you can talk about. So there's nothing outside the category of what you can talk about, right?
No, that is a non sequitur. What we can talk about is just what's epistemically accessible to us. Ontology is going to extend beyond that, right? Of course, the world
how are you
or
talking about
things
something
or
beyond
reality.
that if the category was supposed to be everything you can talk about?
Well, no, you asked me if I could grant that there is a class of things that we can talk about. That's like tautologically true. Yes, there are those things that we can talk about and those things that we can't. That doesn't entail that the category.
That's second line. Don't you see
please
the
let me
mistake
finish.
there? The
Let me
second
finish.
one, there are those things we can't. How are you saying that there are
That-
those things that we cannot talk about?
Tweetathon.
How are you saying that?
Tweetathon. What is the conceptual basis for your? Because you're pointing out a contradiction. What is your conceptual basis for the belief in contradiction? I'm saying that the structure of certain propositions entail that other propositions are false, and that's all I mean by the fact that they negate them. I think you're asking me.
I've already. Okay, so I think at this point maybe we disagree, but I think for my purposes,
This
I'm
has been
satisfied
kind of fun,
that
by
I've
the way.
identified. I think I've identified a basically irredeemable error or mistake on your part. And in terms of
Tweetathon,
where
I think
I'm
you're
going
constructing
with
a
this,
system that you won't acknowledge the like. You can't even get contradiction off the ground in your own framework. You can't use
of course I
contradiction
can.
as a defeater
Of course I can.
if you don't accept
understand what
law of identity.
Of course,
You
I
said
can
that
get contradiction off the ground. One, I've already identified a contradiction in you saying that there is what is not. So there's already that direct contradiction there. But let's go further.
Yeah, but
still.
that's because it entails negation. That what is the principled reason why that contradiction is unjustified? Because it relies on certain logically necessary
it
things
relies on saying
that are
that what
arrived
is not what is. It's what is other than what is. It's like trying to say
which
that
is
it's just
violating the
meaningless.
principle for what reason? Which is meaningless for what reason? There's a more
It's
principled reason
meaningless
that
because
wherein
the words fall apart.
you're referencing certain logical axioms that entail contradictions, but the only reason why that's negative is because there's some normativity to logic that you've accepted.
No, it's because your words can't convey any meaning because there's only one thing we can point at, and we can only point at what is. And you're trying to point at. That's all you're pointing at and pretending you're not pointing at it. It's
hold up, Tweetathon. We've been going in circles. I gotta get some of the audience in here. There have been 2 people listening this entire time. Please,
yeah.
I've heard from Noku before. He's seemed to be reasonable. I want to hear his voice to kind of constrain us such that we don't go in circles here. But I'll invite you to speak if you feel so inclined. If you don't, that's okay too.
Well, Ravolution seems to be clapping and laughing, so I don't know who's riled him up. But
I can invite him to speak as well.
It seems like uh, there's a miscommunication because John, you are whereas Tweetaphon is affirming being and critiquing your positing, if even conceptually, of non-being as an error upon which you proceed. And that kind of is the stumbling block. It seems is not so much being. It seems like both of you would agree on being, but it is non-being that is the big hang up.
Yeah. Well, I don't even see it as relying necessarily on German philosophy as much as I just see it as relying on basic principles of inference and logic. Like, if something is true, it's going to entail um, it's going to entail, if something is true, it's going to entail the impossibility of its falsity. Like, that's just necessarily true. And that's all I mean by non-being. It's not it's something that enjoys genuine ontological existence. It's just the negation of being as a concept. And I still don't apprehend what there is to object to in that.
But Tweetathon doesn't grant you that. You qualify it. You say, I am not affirming non-being. I am affirming it only conceptually, and Tweetathon rejects that. Not even conceptually can you affirm it.
Yeah, I agree with Noku. Well, I mean, Noku's not agreeing with me. I disagree with his. I'm agreeing with his account that I am rejecting it even conceptually, because didn't we say earlier it's like an illusion is an illusion, everything is what it is, and so the conception still is what it is, and we have this universal sense of is. And so whether we want to say something is conceptually, something is physically, or whatever the other terms that are being used here, they are all 100% equal in the sense that they are there to be what they are, right? And so saying something is just a conceptual nothing doesn't really mean anything to me. I think it just falls for the same error, because I think everything ultimately is absolutely real, because there is no other way to be but to be real. And so the mistake of positing a nothing, and we get hung up on this word positing. I mean, it's still positing the concept.
That's what I was about to say. Yeah, I think we're getting hung up on what positing means, because when I think positing, I generally consider that as when you posit something, you include it in your ontology. So generally, like, I'll posit the existence of God to explain reality or something like that. That's generally how I think about that
Yeah,
term.
but I think everything has to be in your ontology, because everything has to be there. And so it's kind of like positing is, even if you're just positing it as a conception, or positing for me is just like to affirm there's something there, or to say there's something meaningful or significant, like acknowledging something. And so at that point, everything that's acknowledgeable is absolutely existing. It's absolutely is what it is. And so there's no like,
I have a
there's no
completely
like
different epistemology. I mean, I think that we can. There are certain constructs, mental constructs, that we can acknowledge that don't entail real existence, right?
well, how are they there to talk about then?
Because not every, like, it seems to me that to you have a certain, I mean, the only analog that I can think of that's relevant to, like, my studies would be a sort of system of modal logic in which anything that's possible is actual.
Yes, that would be the correct move to make, to say that everything that is possible is actual.
But then
Because being is
then
perfectly
what's the
complete, right? It doesn't
distinction?
lack
But
anything.
what's the distinction then between, like, because presumably I know that you don't believe in God. Generally speaking, like, what's the principled reason differentiating the possible from the impossible, right? That doesn't just reference the actual.
Well,
Because presumably, if everything that's
why
possible
would
is
you be positing
actual,
the impossible? I mean, to posit the impossible as something there is just it's just
no. I'm
showing
saying,
where
but no, if
meaning
it's
breaks
no, but
down.
I'm saying that in your under that framework, you have an implication that certain things are impossible because you exclude them in your ontology. For instance, you don't believe in God, and so if everything that's possible is actual, God is possible, therefore God is actual. Well, you don't believe in
Yeah.
God.
So you have to
Therefore, God is
ask, like,
impossible.
why do I?
Because
Yeah.
there's a
So you have to
fundamental
ask.
category. There's a fundamental dichotomy between possibility and impossibility. So what's the principled reason why God is impossible? In which case, you have something that
No. So I
excludes
can
certain
fix
things
it
from
right
being
now
possible.
for you. Like, before
Okay.
you go too far with this thought, the reason I say I don't believe in God is that I don't think there's a coherent concept there to believe in. I think the words just fall apart. So there isn't. It's not like I have a category of the non-being or the impossibles
Well, that's just a
that are
terrible
in their
reason.
own separate
I
world.
mean,
I think that no, because
we're
because
just
I
gonna
already pointed
go
out how I
back
think
though.
that
I mean, you can just anything that you reject intuitively, you can just merely assert is incoherent. There's no fundamental
right. That's correct.
demonstration of that.
No, there
I mean,
is. I already demonstrated how your entire metaphysics is incoherent. But but yeah,
you think
you
you
would just
demonstrated
show a
that.
contradiction. You would just show a contradiction. Like, you would say, okay, God is too controversial for it. Let's just say, like,
So wait.
the
So
pineapple of which nothing is bigger.
hold up. To establish the impossibility of God, you show a contradiction. Why does contradiction entail impossibility? Why does contradiction entail impossibility? This is
So the
exactly
meaning
what I'm
breaks
getting at.
down, so nothing's been identified. Nothing's been identified. It breaks down.
But that's exactly what I've been saying, Tweetafon, is that there are such things as contradictions, but they rely on certain logical categories. The only reason why contradiction would entail possibility is if, tautologically, contradictions are impossible. That is to say, P cannot be negative P at the same time. Something cannot
I've
entail
already
the
rejected your
negation of
whole.
itself.
No.
That's just a different way of explaining or articulating what a contradiction is.
No, because the issue is you're granting some sort of status to the impossibility as though there was something there. Just like when we were talking about what is,
I'm not.
you
That's
you
precisely
did
the
when you
opposite. Tweetafon,
no.
that's not what I'm
If
saying.
only
I
that were
promise you,
true.
that's
If
not what I'm
only that were
saying.
true.
No,
It's
that's not what I'm saying
100%
at
what
all.
you are saying.
No, I'm
And
not.
and that's why
precisely
you
the opposite
name
of what I'm
two when you
saying.
should name one. If you weren't saying it, you wouldn't name two when you should name one.
No, because one entails the absence of the
There you
other.
go.
That's
The one
just
entails the
trivially true.
other. There you go. So you are naming two.
No. One entails the absence of the other. God damn.
The absence of the other. So the other is there to be absent. I mean, you can't say the absence of the other if the other is
Hold on.
supposed to have some meaning.
We're going in circles again. Let's get. I don't even know how to say this. Raw revolution. Let's get. He's been here for a while. He or she. Do you want to comment on the dialogue? I know you've been listening. No comment. Comment. Sorry, I can't hear if.
Yeah, I can't hear him either, but maybe he's just so thoroughly in agreement with me, he feels that my last statement should just stand.
Well, Tweetafon, I will say, if my debate bro, God forbid, side came out, I do apologize. This is all I want to say in the spirit of philosophy, and yes, we can mutually get passionate, but I think it's fun ultimately, and
Yeah, I mean, it's fine. I do honestly think that your position is incoherent and that you're incapable of philosophy. But it's not like I dislike you. I just don't think there can be any truth in your current way of explaining or understanding things.
Fair enough. I mean, it's I will say, always one has to grant that it's entirely possible that I'm just deeply psychologically confused, and I always countenance the possibility that my future self will disagree with my current self stridently. So anytime I have the thought that, maybe I'm hopelessly confused, well, so long as I'm on the process of trying not to deceive myself ever increasingly, then I can rest assured that my future self will maybe correct the error. So,
well, isn't that the goddess to the youth, right? She sits down with the youth and tells them that there are these muddle-headed mortals, and that she's going to tell the youth the truth of metaphysics, and then send him back to Earth to educate them.
Presumably, this analogy is rendered more apt by the fact that you're the goddess in this.
No, I'm just referencing Parmenides. I'm not the goddess. I'm just referencing Parmenides.
Okay. So you're not a goddess.
That's the poem. Yeah. No, afraid not. Although although I think monotheism is an incoherent account of reality, and there's nothing there to be possible. I do find polytheistic positions more, believable. I wouldn't say that they're. I wouldn't argue against them, like get into counter polytheistic apologetics or something. It wouldn't. I wouldn't pretend to know whether they're right or not. I just don't see them as obviously contradictory.
We have very, very diverging intuitions. Okay, let me ask you this: would you at least say that minimally philosophy is deeply contingent on certain baseline intuitions and their implications? Like you have this very, very strong intuition. I don't see like we could more strictly define what an intuition is, because that's kind of a vague, amorphous concept. But you have this intuition about the identity of being, right? And everything following from what is. You would grant minimally that that's kind of like an intuition that you start with, from which things follow, right?
I mean, what do we mean by intuition? I mean, I think there are just everything is undeniable, and so there is what is. There's me and everything present to me, and I have to give a coherent account of it. But the yeah, if that's intuition, I guess. I mean, I just perceive stuff, and whatever I perceive is absolutely undeniable because everything is what it is. So I perceive that there is. There's existence, there's significance, and then
Can I
that's
ask you
the
a
whole.
personal question?
Yeah.
I know that we've talked before, and I know that you're a lawyer, and it seems to me that you hold your like ontology very dear, right? And I was wondering, when does this sort of view, like genuinely, does this sort of view inform your practical life? Like when you're going about things, does the way that you practice law or think about your practical life, is there kind of infringement of your philosophical view on your practical life?
No, not really. I mean, it can inform like the higher level decisions, but I think the way I feel about stuff. But generally, I think that it all is what it is, and we all are what we are, and that we carry out whatever is in our nature or whatever is possible. And so, is it going to inform me on what breakfast I'll eat tomorrow? No, but it might inform me about, do I want to join a particular religion? Am I concerned with the afterlife or something? Like it'll inform those general decisions, but no, it's not going to determine my breakfast or which cases I cite in an argument.
I'm imagining I promise this is not meant to be some sly comment, but genuinely a joke. But I'm imagining some scenario in which you like fail a client or something like that, or you fail to defend what you're supposed to, and you say, "Well, if I didn't defend it, it was impossible." Something.
Yeah, well, it's incoherent, right? There was no position there to defend. But no, it doesn't impact my legal work very much.
Okay. Well, that's interesting.
I mean, what is legal work for the most part? I mean, it's you're taking various fact patterns and trying to match them to certain legal systems or schema, and then it's always just a reading of the law and then a gathering of the facts and then trying to apply the facts to the law and see if you can get the judge to do what you want him to do or the jury to rule a certain way. And then, of course, you're dealing with witnesses and stuff. I mean, I did criminal prosecution for 10 years and I still do a very, very little bit of it now, but I'm on the civil side now. Still a prosecutor, but on the civil side. And yeah, it's like Parmenides is really not. It's not going to play a major role in any case.
But you don't think so? So I always like to like Hume had this thing, right? He was talking about causation and how he sort of rejects the ability to infer causation from what he saw as just everything being exhausted by like impressions and ideas, right? So, but he said when he's operating in practical life, he is never tempted to think that when he picks up the glass, it's not going to move, right? That his hand isn't somehow causally related to this effect in the world. And I've always kind of liked that disjunction between what we can reflect on conceptually and what actually has practical import or transfer in our life has always sort of bothered me. So like suppose you do, like if you do
I don't know if I
underperform or
really
something
agree
like
with
that.
Hume, though.
But just in this case, if you suppose you lose a case or whatever, do you genuinely walk away? Like, is it possible to kind of psychologically assure yourself, oh, whatever's possible is possible? It wasn't possible that I was going to defend this, therefore, like, it's okay.
Well,
Like,
I think it's possible to both win and lose it. And so, I'll experience the loss of it and I'll experience the win of it at some point too. But the like a branching world isn't something that I object to. But but I mean, it's kind of like,
is it
how much
reassuring psychologically to
Oh
have
yeah,
that?
yeah. I think the Eleatic position, or this sort of general position that I hold, is absolutely reassuring and fantastic one to have. I love it.
Why? This is another place
Why
where I think
wouldn't I?
we diverge.
It's like you never missed out on anything. You'll never lose anything. Everything is right where it is, where it's always been, and and we're all going to experience the whole of all that is possible. And so,
but that also includes suffering. That includes every permutation of possible
yeah,
suffering.
and so
that's horrifying to me. That's a terrible thought to me.
No, but you already know you're going to experience suffering. You already know you're experiencing suffering. Here you are in this imperfect world. So you're in this current scenario on a planet where you know that a whole bunch of evil and good things are happening. So you already know full well you're going to get a measure of suffering and a measure of pleasure as well. I mean, that's not really in dispute.
Right.
But I know that none of those moments are exclusive to the other ones and will like overwhelm the other moments. I mean, I think every single moment is valuable in its own right and is what it is, and you don't have to fixate on one of them. And yeah, you can have a good moment and you can wish, oh, I wish it never ended. But what would that even mean? It's like, we don't.
You're such a
fixate
Buddhist.
on one
You don't
moment
even
in
know
time
it.
to the exclusion of all others.
You're such a Buddhist, Weedafon. When I swear.
Yeah, well, maybe. I mean, I don't. I mostly I just read the Eleatic stuff, some related stuff, and then Taoist stuff. Like that's where I'm getting my metaphysics and general philosophical ideas from. And so, yeah, maybe Buddhists, because I guess Buddhists have a lot of contact with China, and I guess they also have contact with Greece. So I'm sure they have some sort of overlap, but
am I wrong
Buddhism,
in thinking?
yeah, is not really to do with me.
Am I wrong in thinking that certain historians have connected certain philosophical schools that sort of Parmenides grew out of, like the historical trajectory involved Buddhism at some point in the past?
Oh, I think that it's impossible to tell where Parmenides learnt the things he learnt, or what he, who he associated with. I mean, you can kind of say, all right, well, he probably associated with Zeno. Maybe he met Melissus. We know he's located at this town in Italy, but generally speaking, people that far back in Western history, or really any history, you're not going to get like a very clear biography that's full of uncontested facts. And the idea that Parmenides must have gotten his ideas from India or Egypt or something like that, it's all to me just sheer speculation. And ultimately, it's not even that I care so much about Parmenides so much as I just find the ideas engaging and they make sense to me, and I will develop them in my own way, and I will be like them, right? I'll be like these ancient people from the Hellenic world and from China, and I will engage in these discussions just like they did. I will figure out my position and beliefs and try to weave them into a coherent whole, and I'll be just like them. But I don't necessarily care about the details of their biography or where they learned something, because ultimately, I mean, let's just say that Parmenides steps through a portal and says, how's it going, Tweetathon? Guess what? You totally misread my poem. I didn't mean any of that. What I actually meant was being is gradated. Some things are more real, less real. What is not really exists, and we all go to nothingness. And I would say, all right, well, I'm not sure how I'm supposed to get that reading out of these fragments, but I think besides the fact that I have a reading of your fragments, I think the position is actually correct. And I don't care what you say, Parmenides. And now let's discuss it. So it's kind of like as well, I just feel like I'm doing what they're doing. I feel that like that's the natural state for what a human ought to be doing in terms of ultimate thought process. It's like to try and weave everything together into a coherent whole. And yeah, I just think that the ancient people are so far beyond our ability to know the biographical details of their life. I just think that too much information has been lost, and what information there is often contradictory. And so to make a biography of them is always kind of iffy, especially for someone like a Zeno or a Parmenides or a Melissus. It's like it's tough to really say much about them and
Do you
to say
think that?
something that won't be contested.
Do you see value though in, from the perspective of scholarship, kind of having this constant dialogue of counter evidence? And because I think of it almost as doing science with limited information, right? Like under certain models of a person, certain things will be expected, and the cash value of the historical model is like the predictions that it makes, right? And scholars sort of adduce different evidence, and I don't know, there's something about, even if it's sort of unresolvable, ultimately, there's something interesting about the scholarship of trying to gather information, and in that process, we sort of end up accumulating more knowledge and learning interesting facts, regardless of whether or not the sort of matter is settled.
Yeah, I mean, if you think a person was on the right track or wrote a lot of insightful words, knowing more about them can help you think even more deeply or think about things from a different angle, because you already acknowledge, okay, I think this body of writing is very insightful or inspiring. And so if you can gather more information on the author, maybe it'll make it even more deep to you or give you new angles to appreciate it from. So yeah, I mean, and obviously, you know what the other thing is, you said academics gathering this information and making biographies. I mean, they have to be doing something, right? And so, and so I guess they're driven to write new papers or to do new research projects. And so that's a big one for
Yeah,
them to do. But it's also just, is that the end point? Are we worshiping the thinker or the thought? And ultimately, I think it's good to be respectful of them, and if we like their writings or find their writings helpful or meaningful, then we ought to see if we can get a bit more appreciation for them and maybe discover something new about the text. But
don't you think?
also,
Well,
we
let
want
me
to be
ask you
like
this.
them.
Well, don't you think that sometimes understanding the thinker can elucidate the thought? Because I feel like a lot of
Yeah, that's what
times,
I'm
for
saying. Like
example,
you can, yeah,
right?
yeah.
For example, somebody like Spinoza, when you read something like the Ethics, the language is so distant from what we're used to. Like many terms are literally inversions of like objective is subjective and so on. This is a problem with a lot of like the medieval thinkers too. And knowing something about not only like the socio-historical context of Spinoza, but the person who he was and his sort of attributes would make certain interpretations more plausible than others. Like,
But then that's
yeah,
the danger, right? Because there's two roads here. One road is interpretation as we believe Spinoza would have meant it. And again, I don't know much about Spinoza, but let's just use him as the example.
I think you would like
There's
him, incidentally.
yeah, well, yeah. I mean, I've heard I would too. So at some point, I probably should go read him.
You
But
should definitely read the Ethics. I think you would be infatuated with it, especially because it has the same structure as Euclidean geometry. Like it's literally laying out axioms, derivations from those axioms, and each proposition is ended with QED. So it's sort of satisfying that that was kind of like the rationalist project at the time to sort of see that, even though many people think it failed, that it wasn't a strictly internally consistent sort of system of inferences, but nevertheless, the fact that he attempted it as a project is still historically relevant and interesting. But sorry, go
Well, that
ahead.
sounds a bit like what I think the Parmenidean project is, right? I think the Eleatic project is to essentially start the conversation by saying we talk about what is, and then we can go one of two ways. One way is to say, all right, knowing that we talk about what is, what are the necessary inferences of that? One necessary inference that was relevant to our earlier discussion is that what is solitary. It's
Okay,
alone.
wait. So Tweetathon. This is
Yep.
actually a key now that we're sort of calmed down. By the way, for context, we were having a strident debate earlier, but in good faith. But so I would agree with you that in general in philosophy it's good to start out with a minimal claim of what's sort of obvious or self-evident or immediate or kind of irrefutable. I know that you would not approach it from this perspective, but this is kind of like a Cartesian project where you sort of find what is kind of epistemologically indubitable, as Descartes said, and you sort of figure out the necessary track of inferences so as to like build up the world and build up your worldview with kind of infallible logical connections between each idea, right?
Yeah, that's what I think Parmenides is doing, basically. I
Right.
think he's saying that we talk about what is, and here are the necessary inferences of that acknowledgement.
So
And then, yeah.
that's what I was about to get at. So you think that there is what is, right? And we think what are the, and I'd grant you that, like that seems to me tautologically true, and that seems to me from like if I want to negate that idea, there's presumably some space of knowing that that idea is false, and even the instance of knowing is something, right? There's like a mental space in which I'm registering all that,
That's
and
my
that's
position. Yeah.
right, exactly. There's no getting past the fact that there's something, right? As soon as there's even reflection, that's and under some interpretations, that's basically the essence of the Cartesian point. But it seems to me a necessary inference of that is that if there's something, then there's not nothing. That just seems to me to be identical to the proposition that there's something.
Yeah. I mean, if we want to revisit it, I would just say, well, we can cast this in the mold of like a discussion of the Parmenidean fragments, right? So I don't have anything in front of me, but if you open up your copy of Parmenides fragments and you go to the second fragment, the goddess has sat down with the youth at this point, and she's going to start a lecture on the way of truth. And so the opening lines are essentially going to be that they have to decide what they're going to talk about. And they can talk about that it is and it needs must be, or they can talk about that it is not and cannot be or must not be. And so they've basically laid out two paths. One is an affirmative and one is a negative. And so it's sort of what you're doing there when you say, if we say that there is what is to speak about, then we have to say there is not what is not there to speak about. And so
wait,
goddess is.
Let me try to clarify this, just because we're at a sort of juncture where I think what I'm claiming is more apparent. I'm not saying that we have to posit what there is not. I'm just saying that it follows.
I'm
it's
denying.
It's logically necessary based on the premise that there is something that its opposite does not obtain, right?
Yeah, but I'm saying that for you to say the sentence that there is not what is that what is, I guess you'd have to say your own sentence, but it's basically there's not what is not there to speak about. That has to have some meaning, and so my position.
Well, I can speak about
it becomes
it, though.
meaningless. It's incoherent. Is my position. You are positing something because there has to be meaning for those words.
But okay, so so at what point in your ontology do you get from, because one of the disconnects in understanding your view, and I'm genuinely trying to understand it, is so you say we start from something, so we can, and you're saying that you kind of build.
Well, we start and end with what is, because that's all that there is.
But you said that your project was one of inference. You said that you start from something, and then there's this inferential process where there are propositions that are connected to each other via inference.
I'll be quicker.
I'll
just do it really
but
quickly.
wait. I was gonna ask a very particular question. You often revert back to the conditions for the possibility of something rely on coherence, and I'm wondering, or rely on meaning, like even semantic meaning, and where does that come from in your ontology? Like, what is the inference that follows from somethingness? At what stage do you get to this point where meaning plays such a fundamental role?
No, I think there's a little distinction there. The point was not that something has to be coherent to be possible. The point was the words that you were speaking to me had to be coherent to signify anything to me. Otherwise, it was just meaningless babble and would fail to identify anything.
But
There would be nothing for me to respond to.
semantically, it wasn't incoherent. It seems to me that
I'm saying it is.
you're proposing that it's incoherent on the condition that what I'm proposing is impossible. So there's some relationship between impossibility and meaninglessness in as much as something. So I'm asking, what is the epistemic criteria by which we establish that certain things, because you see the circularity, right? If it's incoherent in virtue of the fact that it's meaningless, but it's meaningless in virtue of the fact that it's incoherent, there's a fundamental circularity. So presumably there's some more fundamental.
I'm perfectly fine with circularity. I mean, it is what it is.
Okay.
Isn't that circular? There just is what there is. And if
it's not,
there is,
okay,
then there is. I mean, it's all circular, right? Because the truth is ultimately a well-rounded one.
There's a distinction between circularity in the sense of a logical fallacy in which you beg the question, and circularity in the sense of something being tautological. But here's it's not one. Wait. So like 1 equaling 1 is technically circular in the sense that it's a tautology. If I say P is P, that's a tautology.
Yeah,
P is identical to P.
I think that's fine.
That's circular in the sense, but it's not circular in the sense that propositional circularity is when you presume the truth of what you're trying to infer. A condition for your inference is already your inference itself. That's the circularity that I'm getting at, and that's a more problematic epistemically form of circularity.
So just to go back to the point of how am I saying that your words are meaningless? I'm saying that there is what there is, and then you want to say something other than that. And I'm just saying, how can I interpret other than that if we've already established that there just is what there is? It wouldn't make any sense. It would just be a direct contradiction. You would be saying, I am talking about what is not there to be talked about. It's just a direct contradiction.
But
the words fall apart.
Conceptually and logically, though, there is going to be a dichotomy between...
Well, I already denied that, right? I just said I deny this notion that there is something other than what is.
I just don't see
and that's why I think it's an error on your part when you said
I'm not seeing the cognitive process by which that's happening, though. I can't...
No, but I already established it for you. So we said that there is what there is, and I say full stop. I mean, if we go back to what the goddess says to the youth, right, at the beginning of the Way of Truth, we say we have two paths ahead of us.
Wait, hold up. Real quick. How is it a non sequitur from your perspective to say that there is not what there is not? If there is what is, it just logically follows. How is that a non sequitur? It seems to me that those are identical.
To posit, and again, saying posit means just acknowledge in any way. You're trying to say there's something there that you're referencing or speaking of what is not, which is essentially the contradiction of saying is not, or is not is. It's just a direct contradiction that's meaningless. And why is it meaningless?
No, it's actually the rejection of that contradiction. It's a statement that actually reflects the impossibility of that contradiction obtaining. That is to say that if there is something, there's not nothing.
How could it obtain? How could it obtain if there's nothing to obtain? Because if it fails, so that's precisely the point. You're making the mistake of pretending that something's been identified that will then fail to obtain. I'm saying that's the mistake. You never identified anything.
I think in some circuitous way that I cannot identify, we're saying the same thing. I just cannot figure out how.
But your practice of this, let's just pretend that you acknowledge that you didn't identify anything. Then you should never have spoken that sentence if that sentence didn't have any meaning, because we said there is what there is, and there should have been a full stop then. Because we seem to be in agreement that what then follows doesn't reference anything, doesn't have any meaning. And so therefore we shouldn't have added the extra jumble of words on the end that says there is not what is not.
I think
that was an error.
A practical thing. It's not an error in the sense that in the space of logically conceivable propositions that follow from that. One of
So
those
then you're saying that
propositions
there
is
is
there's
and is not.
wait. One of those
That
propositions is
entails saying that there is and is
hold
not.
up. Logically, one of those propositions
What's
that
that?
follows from there is something is that there is
Oh, okay.
also
Down with a different day.
sorry, I was hearing your kids talk in the background.
Oh yeah, they're playing Mario. It's almost their bedtime. Actually, it is their bedtime.
Okay, well, this has been going on for a while. I always, Tweetathon, I always am really intrigued by your worldview. In some sense, it like irks me, but I I make an effort to understand it, and you do defend
Well, I
it
think
and articulate it well. So
I feel like it's the easiest. It's the easiest position of all to understand because it's basically the position that it is what it is. Everything is, and that we should never say that what is not is. And so whenever I have
but
someone say something like that is not, it's like, all right, but what do you mean by is not?
but it's
And then
just
at
an
that point, I think
entailment.
it goes
It's just an
downhill.
entailment. That's it. Like you could say that under my view, it seems to me to be extraneous to articulate something that just follows. Like you don't have to say it. Okay, you don't have to say it, but I'm not seeing
No,
how
but
you're
by
denying the fact that
saying
it
it,
follows.
no, by
It
saying it,
follows.
you break the. So my position, maybe this will help. What is everything we say is of what is, right? I am of what is, you are of what is. Literally everything is of what is.
Sure.
And so when we talk about like you are other than me, or this glass of water is not a glass of orange juice or something, I can understand why we're using the term not there. We're like signifying one detail rather than another. The point is, when we talk about metaphysics, when we talk about what is writ large, that language is only going to result in a mistake. And whether the mistake hits us on day one or hits us later when we start talking about things being generated and destroyed, it's going to hit us at some point. And that's why on this one particular point of what is, I don't think that second sentence is appropriate. I do think the sentence can be appropriate if you said something like, the water is the glass of water and the glass of water is not the glass of water. That's fine. Because at least then, when we read that second sentence, we can say, okay, the meaning here is the water is not all the other things that are not the water, other than the
But
water.
why
But we
can't
can't
okay,
say
so
that about what
supposing
is.
wait, but
There's nothing
supposing
else
that
to reference it.
okay, that's it's there's like one little neuron in the back of and there's like one
Yeah,
little
well, I just
neuron
feel
there's
like
one little
when we deal
synapse
with what is,
in my
when
cortex
we
that
deal
just
with
like
what is
buzzed a
writ
little bit.
large, yeah, when we deal with what is writ large, rather than these particular details like a glass of water, the second sentence can no longer apply. And so it mustn't be said, because if we say it, then we just we've gone off the deep end and
But what
philosophy's
is the
dead.
difference between something you're saying it mustn't be said. So what is the difference between saying like you need not say something, but nevertheless it's a logical entailment of
Well, no, but I don't agree with you that it's a logical entailment, because I think that what is a distinct case from, say, the glass of water. Because, like I was saying earlier, okay, whatever we say is of what is, right? Whatever is of what is. Because there's this writ large metaphysical entity where reality is just one big thing called what is. And so if we talked about a glass of water, the glass of water is going to be a detail of what is, just like you are and I am. We're all of what is. And if we say that the water is the glass of water and the water is not the glass of water, I can accept that, because when we take the second sentence, the glass of water is not the glass of water, we can define the term not the glass of water. Namely, how are we going to define it? We're going to define it as everything other than the glass of water, like the rest of reality, the rest
right.
of what is.
So
And that
you're
makes
saying that
sense.
okay,
So it
so
makes sense.
let me try
But
to
you cannot do that to what is,
let's
because there is no other thing.
okay, so I'm starting to understand you I think a little bit better. And I'll try to we'll do a thing that we haven't done, which is probably a good idea, which is I'll try to articulate your position in a way that you'll agree with, and then try to identify the error. So I feel like sometimes we get in a mode of like attacking my perception of your idea, and it's kind of easy to do that. So my apologies if I did that earlier. But so for there to be true negation, there has to be ontological realness. That's what I'm getting from you. When you reference something internal to reality, there's already the context of reality that exists. You're just saying a particular feature or constituent of reality is not another feature or constituent of reality. But in that case, there's a true referent. The other thing that it is not also enjoys existence.
Yeah,
So
it's affirmation all round. Everything is affirmative.
so, but you can affirm the negation of something that's true. To say something with positive content entails the affirmation of its own negation. That's
So
what
I
trips me
mean, if
up.
you give me an example, I'm suspecting I disagree with you, but what's your
So,
example?
well, take any true proposition. Pick your favorite true proposition.
An apple is red. Let's do that one. Or tomato is red.
So, the tomato is not red is the opposite of that, and to affirm that the apple is red is to simultaneously necessarily affirm that the opposite of that is false. It just follows. It's in some sense it's symmetrical.
I mean, it's almost like you are defining a way of speaking rather than saying anything about the apple itself. I mean, to say the apple is red is to say the apple is red, and that's it. If you want to say that it also entails saying the apple is not orange, that's okay if by saying the apple is not orange, you're affirming that there is some other thing called orange. But you have to affirm there is some other thing called orange to say the apple is not orange. Because if you're denying that there's any meaning to the term orange, then the sentence no longer, it just falls apart, right? You can't say the apple is not orange if orange is meaningless. It's just a meaningless sentence. The sentence itself is like a bird squawking. So what I'm saying is, if we're going to figure out these ways of talking or formulating sentences, I can see how we're doing it about stuff like an apple or a tomato or these limited things that presuppose a context and other things surrounding them.
Yeah,
Because then all we're
wait, you
doing,
could say that, but for the whole of
well, we can't
inverting
do that
comma,
about what is. You can't do that about what is.
I think that I just the cognitive step there's some neuron in my parietal cortex that needs to have a synapse with another one to understand because I just don't see the resistance to an inference that by my lights from my perspective is just logically entailed.
Well, do the second sentence. So we said like the orange is red and the apple is red and the apple is not orange or not red. And so when we took that phrase, the second sentence, the word orange meant something. It signified some other color. Or the apple is, if we said like the apple is an apple and the apple is not an orange, we understand that there's this thing called an orange and it's other than an apple, but it is something.
In the
We're
case that,
acknowledging it.
but why can't
So
there
when
be
we
the
got to what
negation of
is,
universals? Because
so what's the negation of what is? So we say, there is what there is what is, there is
not?
being, however we want to phrase it, and then we
What is
say,
not?
okay, and then but then
Nothingness.
now we have to define what we meant when we said there is what is.
Sorry, I
And
see
what
that.
is any and all meaning. And so when you say there is nothingness, so it's like the second sentence, if when we give it meaning, it's going to be subsumed by the first sentence. And so it can't be this dichotomy because the first sentence,
I'm gonna
what
get.
is all
Sorry,
subsuming.
Tweetafont. We've been going on. I'm gonna get make lying. Great. I just call him Orwell. I'll get Orwell in here.
Yeah, no, let him
Because he
up.
had his
Let
hand
him
up.
speak. I've been going too long.
Sure. No, actually, I'm just going to make one comment, or actually more of a question for clarification, and then I'll go back to listener. But great conversation, guys. Thanks for putting it on a space and letting the rest of us listen. Uh, I may be missing the plot, so if I am, just you can just disregard this. But it was a piece of confusion for me, John, when you were saying for the statement, the true statement, the apple is red,
Mhm.
and it entails that other statements are not true, like the apple is orange. Uh, this may not be germane to the point you're making, but I just want to point out that there are many characteristics of apples and you would have to go through all those characteristics and identify the ones that are incompatible with being red, right? So like it could be that the apple is actually like a mixture of colors, right? Or it could be that the apple is round and it can be both red and round. The reason I brought that up is because in physics, it's not always obvious, right? The
Right.
electron is over in the corner of the room, therefore it can't be in the other corner of the room. Oh, actually, it turns out it can be. So I'm
I
just
think,
saying that
yeah.
it's non-trivial to figure out which characteristics are actually exclusive, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think in philosophy we have to distinguish what's going to be, because if we're trying to establish something conceptual, we have to think in some sense its truth is kind of like indifferent to the empirical facts. Even that strikes some people as a negative aspect of philosophy, but like the only way to revise this, because it it's just an illustrative example to take something like an apple and just kind of like presume it's red. So all you'd have to say to like kind of correct the objection that you just mentioned is to say, okay, conditional on the apple actually being red, right? Then, yeah, then I just realized like how abstract this probably seems to somebody who's scientifically oriented. But conditional on the apple being red, its redness would entail the negation of its blueness, say, or all things that
It
aren't red.
not being blue.
Right.
Yeah.
Cool. Thanks for, yeah. By the way, I didn't mean to split hairs. As
Oh,
you
no, no,
said,
no.
I'm an
I think it's an interesting point.
amateur philosopher. I'm not even that actually. So thank you.
No, yeah, I like it when you bring the empirical aspect. I mean, I think that there always has to be an ebb and flow between the people saying, okay, but what about this empirical fact? And the philosophers just getting lost in pie in the sky conceptual analysis. So, but okay, this space has been going on a while. It went in unpredictable directions. I am going to have to close it soon. So, any finishing comments? And then we
No,
can close
thank
up
you
the
for the
space.
space, John. No, thank you for the space. I don't want to extend it beyond. I mean, I have to go as well, so it's always a pleasure to talk with you. And maybe at some point we'll agree with each other. I don't know. Maybe not today, though.
Wait, have we ever agreed? I don't think we've
I'm
ever
the
agreed.
easiest person to agree with. I just say it is what it is. If
Okay,
everyone
yeah.
just said, like a Make just came up and said something along the lines of, you'd also have to rule out these other possibilities. I'm saying, like, don't even get into trying to model stuff. Just say it is what it is. And then even John, I mean, even Make Lying Great will be on our side, right? He'll say, yes, it is what it is.
I agree with you. I think that I agree with you on that, because I think that I can't reject something that's tautologically true, right? I just can't do that. That's logically impossible.
Yeah, I
However,
mean, it is what
the
it
only
is.
thing, I guess for future discussions, the only thing that I'm tripped up on is why the resistance to negation just as a concept? Because
Well, like
I
I
don't think
said,
it's incompatible. I think it follows from what is.
the question will be this: do you or do you not? And it doesn't have to be answered tonight, obviously. All I'm
Mm-hmm.
saying is the question I think we landed on is there a distinction between negating something by saying the apple is red, the apple is not orange, and what is what is not what is not? And my personal position is the first example is permissible because we are talking about limited details of what is, like an apple or an orange or colors. But the second example is incoherent because when we begin philosophy, we acknowledge that we talk about what is, and therefore that second sentence becomes meaningless. And we cannot have the dichotomy in metaphysics. It
All
just
right,
becomes
one last
meaningless.
question. One last question. Does its meaningless derive from its logical incompatibility with the first proposition, or
It's meaningless. The words just don't identify anything. It's just like
but
a bird
is it at
squawking.
least logically compatible with the first statement?
I like. Well, it has to
By
mean
my
something
life,
to
it
be
just
logically
follows.
compatible. It has to mean something to be logically compatible.
All right. I'm gonna go down this path of trying to grok this again.
It just, I mean, I just don't think there's anything meaningful in it, because with the first example, we can say the apple is not orange, and then the second sentence will make sense because orange means something.
Honestly,
But
when these conversations go on for this long, Tweetathon, I feel like I'm
yeah,
at the tail end of
I'm extending it. I
of an
think we identified
LSD
the
trip
question.
where my brain is fried. I feel like
I'll stop talking. It's like, I think we identified the question. There you go. That's all I'm saying.
I feel like if you would just let us go unmitigated, there'd be a certain point at the 5-hour mark where we'd just be like, but what about the apple? But what about the apple? And just on repeat. All right. Well, I appreciate everybody who tuned in. Appreciate you, Tweetathon, for being a good sport. All of you guys have a good night.
Thank you for the space. Good night.